I went undercover in my dad's company. What I found shocked me. I never planned on coming back. After years of grinding through Harvard Business School and carving out a life for myself in Europe, I was convinced that the Carter estate was nothing more than a relic of my past. Yet, here I was, pulling up to the grand iron gates, my father's voice still echoing in my head. When Richard Carter called, you didn't ignore him. The house stood as imposing as ever, its towering white columns and floor-to-ceiling windows gleaming under the California sun. Some families passed down heirlooms or recipes. Mine passed down wealth, an obscene amount of it, the kind that bought silence, power, and, apparently, problems. My father never cared about appearances and the flashy. Look at me way that new money did. For him, wealth was power, and power was meant to be wielded, not displayed. Inside, the air smelled like expensive cologne, aged whiskey, and leather, things that screamed old money. The staff moved like shadows, efficient and unnoticed, the same as they had since I was a kid. I wondered if they even aged or if my father had just found the perfect formula for freezing people in time. Everything was familiar, yet foreign, like stepping into a childhood home only to realize the furniture was all in the same place. But somehow, the warmth had faded. I found my father in his study, where he always conducted business. The room was more museum than office, filled with awards, framed newspaper articles, and a massive mahogany desk that looked more like a throne. The walls were lined with books he probably never read but kept for the aesthetic. He sat behind that fortress of a desk, sharp as ever, silver hair perfectly in place, eyes that could cut through steel. He was sipping something dark and expensive from a crystal glass, watching me the way a CEO sizes up a new acquisition. He didn't waste time. My father never did. Carter Dynamics was losing something, its core, its soul. The numbers looked fine, better than fine. But something was off. He'd built the company from the ground up, but now he barely recognized it. The people at the top, he said, swirling the drink in his hand, are too comfortable. Comfortable people make bad decisions. That was the closest thing to vulnerability I'd ever seen from him. A company wasn't just a company to him. It was his legacy, his proof that he had built something that mattered. And now, it was slipping through his fingers. He wanted me to fix it, not as an advisor, not as a consultant. He wanted me to go in, no special treatment, no red carpet rolled out. He needed someone on the inside, someone who could see what was really going on, not just what was written in reports designed to make executives feel good about themselves. I let his words settle. It wasn't a request. Richard Carter didn't ask. He instructed. And when he instructed, you either fell in line or became irrelevant. I had options. I could have refused, gone back to my life in Europe, where things were simpler. I had a good thing going. Freedom, distance, my own identity. But here's the thing about family. It messes with your judgment. Despite everything, I still cared. About the company. About what my father had built. And maybe, deep down, I wanted to prove that I wasn't just the son who had walked away. It wasn't just about Carter Dynamics. It was about me. If I did this, I wasn't just stepping into a company. I was stepping into a battlefield of corporate politics, backstabbing, and power plays. And I'd be wearing a target on my back. Still, I found myself nodding, agreeing. Because if I was going to do this, I was going all in. No special treatment, no shortcuts. If there were cracks in the foundation, I needed to see them for myself. My father didn't look relieved, just expectant, like he had already decided I would say yes. As I left his study, the weight of what I just agreed to finally hit me. This wasn't just stepping into a company. This was stepping into a world I had spent years trying to avoid, and there was no turning back now. My father had built Carter Dynamics from the ground up, but now it was my turn to see it from the bottom. That's how I found myself standing in the maintenance room of Carter Dynamics, wearing steel-toe boots, khaki work pants, and a gray uniform that smelled like industrial detergent. Not exactly the look I was used to, but if I wanted to understand what was happening behind the boardroom doors, I needed to start in the places executives never bothered to look. Under the name Jake Adams, I had been hired by an outsourced cleaning company contracted by Carter Dynamics. The hiring process was almost laughably easy. Fill out a short form, sit through a training session that lasted all of 20 minutes, and boom, I was in. No background check, no deep verification. If they had even Googled me, they would have found a completely different man. But no one bothered. I wasn't important enough to raise suspicion. Unlike my original assumption that I'd be working only nights, the cleaning company rotated shifts, meaning I would be there throughout the day. That was the first lucky break. I wasn't just scrubbing floors after hours. I was walking through the halls while the real employees were there. That meant I got to see them, hear them, and most importantly, understand them. The first day was an education. The cleaning crew operated like ghosts, silent, efficient, unnoticed. We moved through the hallways while employees bustled from meeting to meeting, juggling coffee cups and laptops. That was the first thing I noticed. No one greeted the janitors. No one made eye contact. To the people working 9 to 5, we were just background noise, part of the machinery that kept their pristine offices from turning into chaos. My supervisor was a guy named Miguel, a gruff, no-nonsense man who had been working there for over a decade. He was built like a linebacker and had the permanent look of someone who had long since stopped expecting good things to happen. Miguel handed me a mop and a cart with cleaning supplies and walked me through my new reality. Keep moving, don't linger, don't ask questions. That was the rule. No one wanted to hear a janitor's thoughts on corporate ethics. No one wanted to chat with a guy emptying their trash. That was fine by me. I wasn't here to make friends. My first assignment was the executive floor, the heart of Carter Dynamics. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent my childhood running through these hallways, visiting my father's office, listening to business calls I barely understood. Now, I was wiping fingerprints off glass tables and scrubbing the same marble floors I had once walked across in polished dress shoes. It didn't take long to see what my father meant about the disconnect. The executives didn't just ignore the lower-level employees. They didn't acknowledge that they existed at all. The break rooms for janitorial staff were cramped, poorly stocked, and hidden in a corner of the basement. Meanwhile, the executive lounges had espresso machines that probably cost more than my entire cleaning cart. But it wasn't just about luxuries. It was about attitude. I overheard conversations in passing, the kind of things people say when they assume the guy cleaning their floor doesn't speak English, or doesn't matter. Jokes about layoffs, complaints about deadweight employees, casual dismissals of people who had probably given years of their lives to this company. Then there were the small moments, the ones that weren't meant to be seen. A junior employee nervously placing a cup of coffee on an executive's desk, only to be met with an eye roll when she walked away. A manager tossing an entire stack of reports into trash without even looking at them. A well-dressed man in his 50s complaining about how some people just don't have a right image for leadership, while his colleagues nodded in agreement. I had always known that there was a gap between the higher-ups and the employees who actually kept the company running. But seeing it firsthand, that was something else entirely. After a few days, I started to pick up on patterns. Who stayed late, who left early, who actually did work, and who was just good at pretending. I saw the office politics play out in real time, the passive-aggressive emails left printed on desks, the whispered conversations in hallways, the fake smiles that disappeared the second someone turned away. There were also things that didn't add up. Employees coming in at odd hours, locked office doors that should have been open, conversations that stopped the second someone noticed they weren't alone. Something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it just yet. The more I saw, the clearer it became, my father wasn't just paranoid. Carter Dynamics wasn't the company he had built anymore. And if I wanted to understand just how deep the rot went, I would have to dig much deeper. The real question was, how far was I willing to go? The first few days at Carter Dynamics had been eye-opening, but nothing prepared me for Logan Reed. If the company was rotting from the top down, then he was the mold spreading through the walls. Logan was the chief operating officer, a man who wore expensive suits like armor and carried himself with the arrogance of someone who believed the world existed solely for his benefit. His hair was always slicked back, his cologne strong enough to announce his arrival 10 seconds before he entered a room. I had seen men like him before. Corporate predators who thrived on power, who saw human decency as a weakness. I knew I'd have to deal with people like him eventually. I just didn't expect it to happen so fast. It started on my third day. I was pushing my cart down the executive hallway, mentally preparing myself for another shift of pretending to be invisible, when I heard footsteps behind me, heavy, deliberate. I barely had time to turn before something was thrown in my direction. A mop. It clattered onto the floor at my feet. When I looked up, Logan was standing there, watching me like I was gum stuck to his designer shoes. He didn't say much, just a casual reminder to stay out of the way. I didn't react. I had dealt with people like him before. You didn't feed their ego. You didn't give them the reaction they wanted. So I nodded, picked up the mop, and kept moving. But Logan wasn't done. The next few days became a game to him. Every time he passed me, he found some way to make my job harder. First, it was small things, dropping a pen on the floor and waiting for me to pick it up, leaving coffee cups on random desks instead of in the trash. But then he escalated. One morning, I had just finished mopping the break room when he strolled in, made himself a coffee, and accidentally tipped the cup over, spilling the entire thing across the floor. "Oops," he said, barely looking at me as he walked out. Miguel, my supervisor, had warned me not to make waves. Guys like him, they'll make your life hell if you push back. I had nodded and pretended to listen, but I knew something Miguel didn't. My life was already hell. I had worked brutal hours, survived impossible expectations, and clawed my way through one of the most competitive business schools in the world. Logan Reed? He was nothing more than an obstacle, and I had never been the type to let obstacles win. Then came the worst of it. It was late afternoon, and the office was full. Executives were making their rounds. Interns were scrambling to look busy, and I was in the middle of wiping down one of the glass conference tables when I heard Logan's voice behind me. "Hey, Janitor." I turned just in time to see a full glass of water flying toward me. Before I could react, it hit my chest, the ice-cold liquid soaking through my uniform. The room went silent. For the first time, people actually noticed I existed. Some interns looked down, pretending they hadn't seen. A few mid-level employees exchanged nervous glances but said nothing. And Logan? Logan just smiled, his hands in his pockets, like he had done nothing wrong. I stood there, water dripping from my sleeves, my mind racing. I knew what he wanted. He wanted me to snap, to get angry, to give him a reason to fire me on the spot. He wanted a show. Instead, I smiled. I grabbed a rag from my cart, wiped my face, and calmly cleaned up the spill on the floor. Logan watched, waiting for something, anything, but I didn't give him the satisfaction. Because now, I knew exactly what kind of man he was. He thought power was a toy, and he had just made the mistake of showing me exactly how he played the game. And I had always been good at games. After dealing with Logan Reed, I thought I had seen the worst Carter dynamics had to offer. I was wrong. Enter Daniel Brooks. If Logan was a corporate predator, Daniel was a showman. He was the type of guy who had probably been the most popular kid in high school, the one who never really had to try because life just handed him everything. Now, he was the head of marketing, and his reputation preceded him. Brilliant but unbearable, charming but manipulative. His office? A monument to himself. Designer furniture, curated art pieces that screamed, "I have taste and you don't," and a whiskey collection that looked more like a museum exhibit than something anyone actually drank. The man didn't just like luxury. He needed everyone around him to acknowledge it. His desk was an oversized glass slab with no clutter, just an expensive pen and a single leather notebook, as if he actually wrote anything down by hand. There was an entire wall lined with marketing awards, all positioned so that they would be the first thing anyone noticed when they walked in. I first met him when I walked into his office to clean. He was leaned back in his chair, scrolling through his phone, looking like a man who had never cleaned anything in his life. Without even looking up, he reached for his glass, took a sip of whatever ridiculously overpriced whiskey he had poured himself, and casually knocked the glass over. I watched as the amber liquid spread across his glass desk, dripping onto the expensive carpet. He finally looked at me, sighed dramatically, and gestured toward the mess. "Let's see how fast you can fix that." No apology, no embarrassment, just pure amusement. I took my time. cleaned it up without a word. But I could already tell this was a game to him, and I was about to find out just how much he enjoyed playing. Over the next few days, Daniel made it his mission to make my job as miserable as possible. He'd hold impromptu cleaning inspections, where he'd run a finger across a perfectly polished surface and act horrified if he found so much as a speck of dust. He started knocking things over, books, pens, even an entire lamp once, just to see how I'd react. I started to notice patterns. The more people he had in the room, the worse he got. If he was alone, he'd settle for a subtle power move, like making a mess and waiting for me to clean it. But if he had an audience, that's when he turned up the theatrics. One morning, I walked into the executive lounge, ready to empty the trash and wipe down the counters. Daniel was there with a few junior marketers, standing by the espresso machine, holding an empty coffee cup. He looked at me, then at the floor, then back at me. "You missed a spot," he said. I glanced at the floor. It was spotless. Then, right in front of me, he tipped the cup upside down, letting the last few drops of coffee fall onto the freshly vacuumed carpet. "Now you really miss a spot." He smiled like this was the funniest thing in the world. The junior employees chuckled nervously, exchanging glances like they weren't sure if they should laugh or run. One of them looked genuinely uncomfortable, shifting on her feet like she wanted to say something but didn't dare. I cleaned it up. Again, I didn't react. But every time he pulled one of his stunts, it became clearer. Daniel wasn't just another arrogant executive. He was worse. He was a narcissist who needed constant validation. He didn't just want power. He wanted control. And more than anything, he wanted to see how far he could push people before they snapped. A few days later, I learned just how much he enjoyed his little games. I had just finished wiping down his desk when he strolled in, looking entirely too pleased with himself. He stopped in front of his bookshelf, scanned the titles like he was searching for the meaning of life, and then, with zero hesitation, started pulling books out one by one. Hardcover after hardcover hit the floor. Some slid under the desk. Others landed near my feet. When he was done, he turned to me with a perfectly innocent expression. "Wow, what a mess," he said. "You should really keep things more organized." Then he sat down at his desk like nothing had happened, scrolling through emails while I picked up the books. I wanted to laugh, not because it was funny, but because of how predictable it was. Daniel thought he was clever, thought he was subtle, but he was just another insecure executive playing king in his little kingdom, desperate to prove something to himself. And I wasn't giving him what he wanted. The next morning, I found a handwritten note on my cleaning cart. "Conference room. Now." No signature, but I knew exactly who it was from. When I got there, Daniel was already waiting. He was sitting at the head of the long table, feet propped up, spinning a fancy-looking pen between his fingers. A single chair was pulled out across from him, like he was about to conduct a job interview. "Sit," he said, gesturing lazily. I didn't move. He smirked, as if my hesitation amused him even more. "You know," he said, "I've been watching you. You're not like the others. Most janitors, they flinch, they stammer. You don't even blink." He leaned forward, his tone shifting just slightly. "So what's your deal, huh?" That was the moment I realized something important. Daniel didn't just enjoy power. He craved understanding it. He wanted to know what made people tick, why some people broke under pressure, while others held their ground. He had been testing me, waiting for a reaction, and I wasn't giving him one. So I did what I did best. I played dumb, just another guy, trying to get through the day. I shrugged, muttered something about just doing my job, and pushed my cleaning car out of the room. I didn't look back, but I could feel him watching me. Daniel wasn't done playing, but neither was I. By now, I had figured out how things worked at Carter Dynamics. If you weren't part of the inner circle, you didn't exist. And nowhere was that more obvious than in the marketing department. It wasn't just an office. It was a social club, a carefully curated clique where talent mattered less than who you knew. Promotions weren't earned. They were handed out like party favors at an exclusive event. The people at the top weren't necessarily the smartest, the hardest working, or the most innovative. They were just connected. The first time I saw it in action, I was restocking supplies in the break room when I overheard a conversation between two junior employees. One of them, a young woman named Rachel, had been with the company for years. She was good at her job, maybe too good. I had seen her stay late, double-check every campaign, and pick up the slack from others who spent more time gossiping than working. But she was frustrated. She had just lost a promotion to someone named Brad. Brad, as far as I could tell, had the work ethic of a houseplant. I had seen him around. Sharp suit, flashy watch. The kind of guy who spent more time in the executive lounge than at his desk. And yet, somehow, he was now her manager. Rachel sighed, stirring her coffee aggressively. Brad didn't even apply for position, she muttered to her coworker. They just gave it to him. Of course they did, the other person replied. His dad plays golf with Daniel. That explained everything. It wasn't about talent, effort, or results. It was about who could rub elbows with the right people. If you weren't in the club, you weren't going anywhere. And Daniel Brooks? He was the club president. I started watching more closely. There were clear favorites. Employees who were invited to off-the-record meetings, private lunches, and corporate retreats that weren't exactly advertised. Meanwhile, the real workers, the ones who actually kept the department running, were treated like background noise. But the favoritism wasn't the worst of it. The real problem was the money. I had noticed it in passing before. The absurdly expensive client dinners, the never-ending expense reports, the casual mentions of business trips that sounded more like vacations. But it wasn't until I stumbled upon an actual conversation that I realized just how deep it went. It was late, and I was emptying trash cans near Daniel's office when I heard voices. The door was cracked open just enough to see inside. Daniel was sitting behind his desk, laughing with a man I didn't recognize. On the table between them were 2 glasses of whiskey and a stack of receipts. Daniel picked one up and waved it in the air. You really think finance is going to question a $5,000 client dinner in Napa? The other man chuckled. As long as we slap a couple of business contacts on the bill, no one's asking anything. Daniel grinned. Exactly. Perks of the job. I stayed just long enough to see him sign off on a few more expenses before making my exit. I didn't need to hear the rest. I had already seen enough. Daniel Brooks wasn't just playing favorites. He was playing the system. And no one was stopping him. At least, not yet. By this point, I knew exactly what kind of place Carter Dynamics had become. The favoritism, the backdoor deals, the unchecked spending. It was all right there, hiding in plain sight. And nobody cared. Not the executives, not the managers, and certainly not the people benefiting from the system. But I had to know for sure. I had to see if there was even a shred of accountability left. So, against my better judgment, I decided to test the system. I went to HR. The Human Resources office was tucked away on the 3rd floor, far from the executives, but just close enough to remind employees that they were being watched. The waiting area was sterile, almost too clean, like they were trying to make people forget why they were there in the first place. Karen Mitchell, the head of HR, greeted me with the kind of smile you see in corporate training videos, polite, rehearsed, but with absolutely no warmth behind it. She gestured for me to sit across from her desk, a space that was as meticulously organized as her appearance. A single-frame quote sat on the shelf behind her. Asterisk, culture is a foundation of success. Asterisk, it felt more like a warning than an inspiration. At first, she listened. She nodded in the right places, took notes, asked just enough follow-up questions to make it seem like she was taking my concerns seriously. I told her about Daniel Brooks, the favoritism, the excessive spending, the way he treated employees like disposable tools. I didn't even get into the part where he openly mocked janitorial staff. Figured I'd save that for round 2. And then, just like that, the switch flipped. Karen set her pen down and folded her hands neatly on the desk. The warmth drained from her expression, replaced by something colder, more calculating. I appreciate your perspective, she said, carefully choosing her words. But you have to understand, Carter Dynamics has a unique company culture. It's fast-paced, competitive. Some people mistake that for favoritism. I let that sink in. She wasn't just brushing me off. She was reframing everything I had just said. I pressed on. I brought up the budget misuse, the blatant personal spending under the guise of business expenses. She didn't even flinch. There are always gray areas in corporate finance, she said. As long as our leadership signs off on expenses, it's not our place to question their judgment. Translation, as long as the right people were happy, nothing was going to change. I tried again. I asked if there was any formal process for reporting ethical concerns, if there were any protections for employees who spoke up. That was when she smiled. Not the fake customer service smile from before. This one was different, sharper. She leaned back slightly, tilting her head just enough to make it clear that she wasn't taking this conversation seriously anymore. You know, she said, I've been in HR a long time, and I've learned that the employees who thrive here are the ones who understand how things work. They don't try to change the culture. They adapt. She let the silence hang between us for a moment before adding, It's important to know your place. That was it. That was the real message. Not just for me, but for anyone who dared to question the way things were run. I walked out of that office with my answer. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as intended. And if I wanted to fix it, I'd have to do it myself. By now, I had accepted the fact that Carter Dynamics wasn't just corrupt, it was built to be that way. HR had made that clear. The people at the top weren't just ignoring the problems. They were the problems. And if I was going to do something about it, I needed proof. I didn't expect it to fall right into my lap. It happened late one evening while I was cleaning the executive floor. Most of the offices were empty, the kind of quiet that made you feel like you weren't supposed to be there. But the CFO's office, now that was different. I had been in there a few times before, always careful, always quick. The place was what you'd expect from a man whose job was to manage the company's finances, expensive but soulless. Framed stock certificates on the wall, a mahogany desk big enough to land a helicopter on, and a liquor cabinet filled with bottles that probably cost more than my entire cleaning cart. Normally, I wouldn't have paid much attention. But that night, something was off. The computer screen was still on. Not locked, not in sleep mode, just open, like someone had left in a hurry. And right there, sitting next to the keyboard, was a stack of papers. I should have walked away. Should have just emptied the trash, wiped the desk, and moved on. But I didn't. I glanced over my shoulder. The floor was empty. No cameras in this part of the office, at least none that I knew of. I picked up the top sheet. It was a financial report, dense with numbers and corporate jargon. At first, it didn't make much sense. But then I saw it, large sums of money listed under employee salary adjustments. Except they weren't going to employees. Page after page showed the same thing. Raises and bonuses that should have gone to lower-level staff were being rerouted into executive accounts. The names attached to the transfers? The very same managers and directors who kept talking about budget constraints whenever employees asked for better pay. And that wasn't the worst of it. Another document listed transactions under vague descriptions: consulting fees, operational costs, research expenses. But the money wasn't staying in Carter Dynamics. It was moving. Offshore accounts, private investments. Some of it even funneled into what looked like fake vendor contracts. It was blatant theft. I flipped through the pages, my fingers tightening around the edges of the paper. It wasn't just a little creative accounting. It was systematic. Someone had built this network carefully, ensuring that everything looked legitimate on the surface. To anyone who wasn't looking too closely, it would just seem like standard financial operations. But I was looking closely. I moved to the next set of documents and almost laughed at how brazen it all was. There were notes about employee salary requests being denied due to budget constraints in the same reports that showed five-figure retreat expenses at five-star resorts. A detailed breakdown of a marketing initiative that had supposedly cost $500,000. But when I checked the listed vendors, half of them didn't exist. One invoice was from a company named Future Edge Consulting. I Googled it later. The only thing that popped up was a blank website and a disconnected phone number. Whoever had set this up wasn't even trying to be subtle anymore, because they didn't have to be. But the last file, the one that really made my stomach turn, was an email thread. A conversation between the CFO and two other executives. They weren't just stealing from their own employees. They were selling out the company. The emails referenced confidential project details, strategic plans, and competitor negotiations. It wasn't just talk, either. There were mentions of agreed-upon figures, payments made in exchange for inside information. They were feeding Carter Dynamics secrets to an outside firm. One message stood out. It was from the CFO himself. Asterisk, we need to ensure the next phase moves smoothly. If anyone asks questions, we'll blame market conditions. Keep this between us and make sure the finance team doesn't catch wind of the adjusted numbers. As long as we stay aligned, we're looking at a substantial payout within the next quarter. Asterisk, a substantial payout. And judging by the numbers I was seeing, that payout was coming straight out of the pockets of employees who were already underpaid and overworked. I placed the documents back exactly as I found them, careful not to leave any trace. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. This wasn't just another example of corporate greed. This was something bigger. I had come here to see how bad things really were. Now I knew. The question was, what was I going to do about it? The moment I put those documents back, I knew there was no turning back. I had come to Carter Dynamics looking for the truth, and now I had it, on paper, in numbers, in emails. But knowing wasn't enough. I needed evidence, undeniable proof that would tear through the corporate walls and expose everyone who had been feeding off this company like parasites. And that meant I had to get creative. I spent the weekend making sure I had everything I needed. A hidden camera, small enough to fit inside my cleaning cart. A second phone with encrypted storage. A backup drive tucked away in my apartment. If I was going to do this, I wasn't leaving anything to chance. The best part? Nobody paid attention to janitors. I had spent weeks being invisible, and now I was going to use that to my advantage. On Monday morning, I walked into work like it was any other day. The executives were in their usual rush, meetings, coffee runs, phone calls that sounded more like power plays than actual conversations. No one even glanced in my direction as I wheeled my cart through the halls. I started small, positioning the camera just right as I wiped down desks and emptied trash cans. It didn't take long to get what I needed. First, Daniel Brooks. He was in his office, feet up on his desk, bragging to a colleague about how he had written off a weekend trip to Miami as a corporate retreat. Next, Logan Reed. The guy was barking orders at an intern, making it painfully clear that her job depended on how well she kept her mouth shut about a suspicious invoice. Then, the real gold mine, the CFO. I had timed it perfectly. The cleaning schedule put me in his office right when he was on a call. I could hear every word. Relax, he was saying. Nobody's looking at the details. We've been doing this for years. He chuckled. The budget adjustments? All covered. If anyone asks, it's restructuring due to market conditions. That was it. The final piece. The recording would speak for itself. But I wasn't done. I needed to make sure this didn't get buried. I needed someone with real power on my side. So I made a call. Sunday night. I had reached out to my father. I kept it vague, just enough to make him curious. Now, sitting across from him in his study, I laid everything out. The recordings, the documents, the conversations. For the first time in my life, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Not disappointment, not skepticism, pride. We take this to the board, he said finally. Monday morning. No delays. I nodded. The plan was in motion. In less than 24 hours. Carter Dynamics was about to learn what happens when you push the wrong person too far. And I was more than ready. Monday morning. The moment of truth. I wheeled my cleaning cart into the boardroom just as the executives were taking their seats. It was a massive space, all glass walls and high ceilings, designed to make anyone standing in it feel small. The long, polished conference table reflected the morning light, and around it sat the most powerful people in Carter Dynamics. Logan Reed was there, looking as smug as ever, leaning back his chair like he owned the place. Daniel Brooks sat a few seats away, flipping through his phone, barely paying attention. Karen Mitchell had a clipboard in front of her, ready to pretend she cared about whatever discussion was about to happen. They barely noticed me. Just another janitor doing his job. Someone laughed. Didn't know we started holding meetings in the break room. Logan smirked, nudging Daniel. Maybe the floors weren't shiny enough. Figured they needed a live demonstration. I said nothing. Just kept moving, positioning myself near the projector. My father sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. The CEO of Carter Dynamics, a man who had built this empire from nothing, was about to watch it be rebuilt right in front of him. The chatter died down as the meeting officially started. I waited, let them talk, let them feel like they were in control for just a few more minutes. And then I moved. I reached for my cleaning vest, unzipped it, and let it drop to the floor. Underneath, a sharp navy blue suit. Not rented. Not borrowed. Mine. The silence that followed was absolute. Logan's smirk disappeared so fast, it was almost comical. Daniel froze mid-scroll, his eyes darting up from his phone. Karen's pen slipped from her fingers. I stepped forward. No cart. No mop. Just me. My name is Ethan Carter, I said, and I'm here to show you exactly what's been happening behind closed doors. Before they could react, I pressed play. The screen lit up. The first recording played, Daniel Brooks, laughing as he bragged about expensing his Miami trip. Then Logan, intimidating and in turn into silence. Then the CFO, his voice crystal clear as he detailed how they had been siphoning money from employee raises into executive accounts. Every word, every number, every lie they had told, now broadcasted for the entire boardroom to hear. Logan shot to his feet. "This is ridiculous," he barked. "You can't just—" "I can," I interrupted. "And I did." Daniel tried to laugh it off, but his face had gone pale. "This is completely out of context. You think a few recordings prove anything?" I held up the stack of documents. "I think a detailed paper trail of financial fraud does." Karen looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. This is a violation of privacy. Tell that to the employees who were robbed of their raises." I shot back. "Or the investors who don't know their money is being funneled into offshore accounts." The board members were shifting in their seats now, whispering among themselves. My father finally spoke, his voice calm, steady. "Enough," he said. "We've seen what we need to see." The decision was swift. Logan Reed, Daniel Brooks, and Karen Mitchell fired on the spot. The CFO escorted out of the building before he could try to delete any files. A full-scale investigation into financial misconduct was launched within the hour, and then my father stood, straightened his tie, and looked around the room. "I'm stepping down," he announced, effective immediately. Stunned silence. He turned to me. "Ethan will be taking over as CEO." Logan made a sound like he wanted to protest, but thought better of it. Daniel looked like he might actually be sick. Karen? She was already gathering her things, knowing her time was up. I took a breath. A deep one. I had walked into this company as a janitor. Now, I was walking out of this boardroom as the man in charge. But before I did anything else, I made one thing clear. This company changes today. I said, from now on, every employee, no matter their position, has a voice, and they're going to be heard. Because Carter Dynamics wasn't just my father's legacy anymore. Now it was mine.